She knocked on the door like she owned the street, clipboard tucked under her arm, a tight smile on her face. "This is a routine HOA rule inspection," she said. The man inside didn't argue. He didn't shout. He only raised one hand and quietly said, "Ma'am, this isn't a good time." What happened next shattered the silence of the entire neighborhood. A gunshot echoed, a body fell to the porch, and within seconds, unmarked police cars flooded the street from every direction. Neighbors watched in disbelief as officers swarmed the house, weapons drawn, shouting commands she couldn't even understand anymore, because the woman who thought she was enforcing community rules had just fired a shot in a neighborhood already under secret police surveillance. She didn't know the man behind that door wasn't just a resident. She didn't know the street was being watched, and she definitely didn't know this single moment would destroy her life forever. Before this story goes any further, let me ask you something important. Round pushpin, which city are you watching this video from right now? Are you in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, or maybe a quiet neighborhood that looks just like the one in today's story? Type your city name in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from, and trust me, this story might feel uncomfortably close to home. Because what you're about to hear isn't just another HOA nightmare. It's a real reminder of what happens when power, ego, and fear collide. In many American neighborhoods, HOAs exist to keep order. They regulate lawns, parking, trash bins, noise levels, things most people don't think twice about. But sometimes that small amount of authority goes to someone's head. And when it does, the consequences can be devastating. Before we dive into this shocking story, take 1 second to subscribe to the channel. We share real-life stories that expose hidden truths, abuse of power, and moments where ordinary situations turn into life-changing disasters. Subscribing helps the channel grow, and it ensures you never miss stories that feel like movies but are terrifyingly real. Now take a deep breath, because this story isn't about rules. It's about control. It's about arrogance. And it's about a woman who believed she owned her neighborhood until one decision changed everything. No music cue, no warning, just one knock on a door that ended in a gunshot. Let's go back to the moment it all began. Her name was Linda H. Thompson, but in Maplewood Lane, nobody called her that. Behind closed doors, in text messages, in whispered conversations over backyard fences, she was just that HOA Karen. Linda was 53 years old, divorced, and lived alone in a perfectly maintained beige house at the corner of the street. Her lawn was always trimmed to the exact height allowed by HOA bylaws. Her trash cans were never visible. Her windows were spotless. She didn't just follow the rules. She worshipped them. And more importantly, she enforced them. Linda held the unofficial but feared title of HOA Rule Enforcement Officer. It wasn't a paid position. It wasn't even that powerful on paper. But in real life, it made her feel important. Every morning, she drank black coffee, opened her binder of HOA regulations, and reviewed violation reports like a commander planning a mission. She highlighted sections. She memorized codes. She smiled when neighbors avoided eye contact. Fear, to her, was respect, and respect was addictive. Maplewood Lane looked like the kind of street you'd see in a real estate commercial. American flags hanging from porches, kids' chalk drawings fading on driveways, golden retrievers barking behind white fences. It was quiet, too quiet. What no one knew, what Linda especially didn't know, was that this street was already under police surveillance. Unmarked vehicles had been parked nearby for days. Officers rotated shifts. Cameras monitored one specific home, house number 147. The residents weren't told. The HOA wasn't informed. And Linda, she was completely blind to it. That morning, Linda woke up with purpose. It was rule inspection day, her favorite. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusted her blazer, and pinned her HOA badge just slightly higher on her chest so it would be noticeable. She looked official. She felt powerful. Before leaving, she opened her bedroom drawer. Inside was a small handgun. Legal. Registered. Loaded. She stared at it for a moment. This neighborhood is getting unpredictable, she muttered. She placed the gun into her purse. Not because she needed it, but because carrying it made her feel in control. She started walking. House 102, grass half an inch too tall. Violation. House 110, trash cans left out past sunset. Violation. House 121, unauthorized holiday lights, still hanging. Violation. She wrote, fast, precise, satisfied. Some doors opened. Some neighbors argued. Most just sighed. Everyone knew fighting Linda was pointless. She always won. Until she reached the end of the street. Linda stopped walking. House 147 didn't look abandoned, but it didn't look lived in either. The windows were dark. The curtains never moved. No decorations. No visible mailbox number. And cameras. Too many cameras. Small black lenses mounted near the door, the garage, even the side fence. Linda's lips tightened. Unauthorized security installations, she whispered. She checked her clipboard. Multiple violations. She smiled. Linda walked up the driveway without hesitation. She knocked. Hard. No answer. She knocked again harder. After a few seconds, the door slowly opened. A man stood there. Mid-40s. Short hair. Plain clothes. Calm eyes. Not surprised. Not scared. Just alert. Yes, he asked. Linda didn't greet him. She didn't smile. HOA, rule inspection, she said sharply. You have several violations that need to be addressed immediately. The man looked at her clipboard, then at her face, then passed her down the street. Ma'am, he said calmly, this isn't a good time. Linda felt something rise in her chest. Disrespect. She stepped closer. It's always a good time to follow the rules, she snapped. You're required to cooperate. The man raised one hand slightly. Not aggressively. Not threatening. Just enough. Please step back. Something changed in Linda's expression. Fear flickered. And fear, for Linda, always turned into anger. You don't get to tell me what to do, she said, her voice trembling. I have authority here. She reached into her purse. The man's eyes widened. Ma'am, don't. Neighbors would later say this was the moment everything froze. The air. The sound. Time itself. Linda pulled out the gun. Her hands shook. She didn't aim. She reacted. The sound echoed down Maplewood Lane like a thunderclap. Birds exploded from trees. A sharp pain tore through the man's shoulder as he collapsed backward onto the porch. Blood spread. Linda dropped the gun. The clipboard fell beside it. She stood there, frozen, breathing fast. What did I do? She whispered. Sirens screamed. Not one. Not two. Dozens. Unmarked cars flooded the street from every direction. Doors flew open. Armed officers surrounded the house in seconds. On the ground. Don't move. Hands where we can see them. Linda turned in circles, confused, terrified. I'm HOA, she cried. This was an inspection. No one listened. She was forced to the ground. Handcuffed. Neighbors poured out of their homes. Phones recording, mouths open in shock. This wasn't an HOA incident anymore. This was a crime scene, as paramedics rushed to save the wounded man. One detective crouched beside Linda. You picked the wrong house, he said coldly. Linda shook her head. I was just doing my job. The detective leaned closer. That man you shot, he said quietly, was under active federal protection. Linda's face went pale. What does that mean? The detective stood up. It means this street was never yours. And as Linda was dragged toward the police car, she finally realized something terrifying. The rules she loved so much were about to destroy her. The ambulance doors slammed shut. Sirens faded into the distance as House 147 was sealed off with yellow tape. Neighbors stood frozen on their lawns, phones raised, whispering the same question again and again. Who was that man? Linda sat handcuffed in the back of a police cruiser, her hands numb, her mind racing. She kept replaying the moment in her head, the knock, the voice, the raised hand. He hadn't attacked her. He hadn't threatened her. He had warned her. And now everything felt wrong. This wasn't how normal shootings were handled. Linda noticed it immediately. The officers weren't relaxed. They weren't chatting. They weren't treating her like just another suspect. They were tense. Radios crackled nonstop. Men in plain clothes arrived, no badges, no names, just sharp eyes and quiet authority. One of them flashed credentials so fast Linda barely saw them. Federal. Her stomach dropped. At the hospital, doctors worked fast. The bullet had missed vital organs by inches. The man survived, but barely. As surgeons stabilized him, 2 armed officers stood guard outside the operating room. Not local cops, federal agents. Because the man Linda shot wasn't just a homeowner. His name was Daniel Cross. And Daniel Cross was supposed to be invisible. Daniel Cross didn't exist on social media. No Facebook, no Instagram, no LinkedIn, no digital footprint at all. Because Daniel Cross was a confidential federal informant. For over 2 years, he had been working undercover, feeding information to authorities about a large criminal network tied to illegal firearms trafficking and organized crime. And Maplewood Lane? It wasn't his home. It was his safe house. House 147 had been chosen specifically because it was quiet, boring, and controlled by an HOA that discouraged attention. No loud parties. No suspicious activity. No surprises. At least that was the plan. For weeks, federal agents had been monitoring Maplewood Lane. Unmarked vehicles rotated positions. Cameras watched the entrances. Agents listened for anything unusual. The operation was nearing its final stage. Daniel was days away from testifying. Days away from exposing names that would send powerful people to prison. And then Linda knocked on his door. At the police station, Linda finally stopped shaking. She asked for a lawyer. She demanded answers. I was enforcing HOA rules, she repeated. I had a right to be there. The detective across the table didn't argue. He slid a thick folder toward her. Photos, reports, surveillance stills. This, he said, tapping the file, was never an HOA matter. Linda flipped through the pages. Her heart pounded harder with every image. House 147. Cameras. Agents watching from a distance. You interfered with a federal operation, the detective continued, and you discharged a firearm. Linda swallowed. I didn't mean to shoot him. But you did, he replied. By nightfall, the charges were clear. Aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Unlawful discharge of a firearm. Interference with a federal investigation. Her HOA badge was confiscated. Her gun license suspended. Her world, once defined by rules and control, collapsed in less than 12 hours. In her holding cell, Linda sat alone. No clipboard, no authority, no control. She replayed Daniel's words again. Ma'am, this isn't a good time. For the first time in years, Linda realized something painful. She hadn't been protecting the neighborhood. She had been policing it. And now, someone was fighting for his life because of her need to feel powerful. Outside, Maplewood Lane wasn't quiet anymore. News vans lined the street. Neighbors gave interviews. She always took things too far, one woman said. She loved the power. Another admitted, nobody ever stood up to her. The HOA board went silent. Emails were deleted. Meeting records vanished. Because everyone knew what was coming next. Federal agents scrambled. Daniel's cover was compromised. The safe house was burned. The operation was delayed indefinitely. Every delay increased risk. Every delay endangered lives. All because one woman couldn't walk away from a clipboard. Late that night, Linda's attorney arrived. He leaned close and spoke quietly. There's something you need to understand, he said. What? Linda whispered. The man you shot, he paused, was scheduled to testify against people who don't forgive mistakes. Linda's blood ran cold. They know where he was hiding, the attorney continued, and now they know how he was exposed. Linda stared at the wall. The rules she loved had led her here. But the consequences? They were just beginning. As Linda lay awake on the cold bench, one terrifying thought echoed in her mind. She hadn't just ruined her own life. She may have signed someone else's death warrant. Linda didn't understand how fast a life could unravel until the first night in jail turned into the second. Time behaved differently behind bars. Minutes stretched, thoughts echoed. Every sound felt louder than it should. Somewhere down the hallway, a woman cried. Somewhere else, someone laughed like they had nothing left to lose. Linda sat on the cold bench and stared at her hands. These were the same hands that once measured grass height with a ruler, the same hands that slid warning notices under doors, the same hands that held a gun for the first time in her life and pulled the trigger without fully realizing it. She kept telling herself it was an accident, but the word felt weaker every time she repeated it. Across town, the situation was growing far more dangerous than Linda could imagine. Daniel Cross was awake. Barely. Machines hummed around him. His shoulder was bandaged, his face pale, his breathing shallow. 2 armed agents stood at the door, rotating every hour. Another agent sat inside the room, pretending to read while never taking his eyes off Daniel. When Daniel finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw wasn't a nurse. It was a badge. "You're not safe here anymore," the agent said quietly. Daniel swallowed. His voice was weak. "They know." The agent nodded. "The safe house is compromised. The street, the neighbors, everything." Daniel closed his eyes. He had known this day would come, but he hadn't expected it to come because of a woman with a clipboard. Within hours of the shooting, word had already started spreading through the criminal network Daniel was supposed to testify against. Information moved fast in that world, faster than police reports, faster than official statements. Someone had knocked on the wrong door. Someone had fired a gun. And someone had survived. That was all they needed to know. Phones rang in dark rooms. Messages were sent in code. Names were spoken quietly. Orders were given without emotion. Daniel Cross was now a liability. Back at the police station, Linda was taken into an interview room again. This time, the tone was colder. No raised voices. No accusations. Just facts. A federal prosecutor sat across from her, hands folded, eyes sharp. "You didn't just shoot a man," he said. "You exposed him." Linda shook her head. "I didn't know. No one told me." "That's not a defense," he replied. "That's reality." He slid another document across the table. A timeline. Her inspection route. Her arrival time. The gunshot. The police response. Everything precise. Everything permanent. "You inserted yourself into a situation you had no authority over," the prosecutor continued. "And now we're dealing with consequences that extend far beyond you." Linda's voice cracked. Is he going to live?" The man paused for half a second. "We hope so," he said, "but hope doesn't stop bullets." That night, news broke nationwide. HOA dispute turns violent. Neighborhood shooting exposes federal operation. Witness under protection shot during HOA inspection. Linda's name was everywhere. So was Maplewood Lane. Reporters dug into old HOA complaints. Former residents came forward. Stories piled up. Fines over nothing. Intimidation threats masked as rules. The image of a rule-enforcing volunteer shattered. In its place stood something uglier. Power without restraint. Meanwhile, Daniel was moved again. This time without warning. In the middle of the night, lights dimmed, alarms temporarily disabled, and a decoy patient was wheeled out the front entrance while Daniel was taken through a service corridor. He didn't ask where they were taking him. He didn't need to. Somewhere temporary. Somewhere hidden. Somewhere that would never feel safe enough. But even as he was transferred, the danger followed. A black SUV had been seen circling the hospital earlier that evening. No plates. No explanation. Gone before officers could stop it. Coincidence? No one believed that anymore. Linda learned about this through her attorney. "They're saying the threat level has increased," he told her during a brief visit. "This isn't just about sentencing now." She looked at him confused. "What do you mean?" He lowered his voice. "There are people involved who don't want him alive, and they're not happy." Linda felt a chill crawl up her spine. "I never wanted this," she whispered. Her attorney sighed. "Intent doesn't erase impact." Days passed. Daniel's testimony was postponed, then postponed again. Each delay weakened case. Witnesses got nervous. Evidence lost momentum. Pressure mounted from all sides, and with every passing day, Linda's role in all of it became clearer. She wasn't just a footnote. She was the spark, the woman who believed rules mattered more than people had triggered a chain reaction no one could stop. One evening, as Linda sat alone, a guard stopped at her cell. "You have another visitor." She expected her lawyer. Instead, a man in a dark suit stepped inside the visiting area. No badge, no introduction. He sat down slowly. "I'm not here to threaten you," he said. "I'm here to be honest." Linda's heart pounded. "You changed things," he continued. "Not just for yourself. For everyone." She swallowed. "Is he going to be okay?" The man didn't answer right away. "He's alive," he said, finally. "For now." Linda closed her eyes. "For now," she repeated. As the man stood to leave, he paused. "One more thing," he said. "If you had just walked away that day, none of this would exist." The door closed behind him. Linda sat alone in silence. For the first time, there were no rules to hide behind, only consequences. And somewhere out there, a man was still running for his life because she couldn't let go of control. The courtroom was colder than Linda expected. Not physically, but emotionally. Wooden benches filled with strangers. Cameras clicking softly. Reporters whispering. Every movement felt rehearsed, controlled, and completely indifferent to how her life had collapsed. Linda sat at the defense table, hands folded tightly, wearing a plain gray suit that felt nothing like the power outfits she used to wear during HOA meetings. No badge, no clipboard, just a name printed on a legal document. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Linda did too, slowly. This was a different kind of authority, one that didn't care how confident she used to be. The charges were read aloud. Each one landed heavier than last. Aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Unlawful discharge of a firearm. Interference with a federal investigation. Words she had never imagined attached to her name. The prosecutor stood and began calmly, methodically, painting a picture the jury couldn't ignore. A quiet street. A woman with perceived authority. A man under protection. A single reckless decision. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The facts did the damage. Linda's attorney tried to humanize her. He spoke about fear, about misunderstanding, about a woman who believed she was doing her job. But the moment that changed everything came when the video was played. Body cam footage, the knock, the conversation, the raised hand, the gunshot. The courtroom went silent. Linda couldn't watch. She stared at the table, her breathing shallow, her chest tight. In that moment, the denial finally cracked. There was no editing, no bias. Just reality. The man had tried to de-escalate. She hadn't. Across the room, Daniel Cross sat in the witness box. His arm was still in a sling. His face thinner, older, the kind of tired that sleep can't fix. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but every word carried weight. "I asked her to step back," he said. "I told her it wasn't a good time." The prosecutor asked him why. Daniel paused. "Because people were watching," he replied. "People who would kill me if they knew where I was." A murmur moved through the courtroom. Daniel explained how the safe house had been chosen, why Maplewood Lane mattered, why silence and routine were essential. And then he looked directly at Linda. "I wasn't afraid of her," he said. "I was afraid of what her presence would signal." Linda felt something collapse inside her. Not anger, not defensiveness, shame. Outside the courtroom, the story had grown bigger than either of them. National outlets debated HOA power. Social media tore into Linda's past behavior. Former neighbors released old emails and recorded conversations. Patterns emerged. Intimidation disguised as regulation. Control framed as compliance. The HOA board dissolved within weeks. Members resigned quietly. Legal notices were issued. Insurance policies were canceled. The organization Linda had lived for vanished without ceremony. Inside the courtroom, the trial moved quickly. Too quickly. Linda testified. She spoke about fear, about feeling threatened, about believing she had the right to be there. But under cross-examination, the cracks showed. "Did he touch you?" "No." "Did he threaten you?" No. Did he point a weapon at you? No. The questions stacked up like weight on her chest. Then came the final one. Did you have the option to walk away? Linda hesitated. The courtroom held its breath. Yes, she whispered. That was the moment the case was decided. Closing arguments didn't change much. The jury didn't deliberate long. When they returned, Linda couldn't feel her legs. The verdict was read. Guilty. Not on every charge, but on the ones that mattered most. Linda felt strangely calm, like someone who had finally reached the bottom of a long fall. Sentencing was scheduled weeks later. In the meantime, Daniel disappeared again. No press, no statements, no appearances, just a name slowly fading from headlines. Linda spent her nights staring at concrete walls, replaying one decision over and over. Not the trigger pull, but the step forward. If she had stayed on the sidewalk, if she had ignored one house, if she had let go. On the day of sentencing, the courtroom filled again. This time, no cameras, just consequences. The judge spoke carefully, deliberately. This court recognizes fear, he said, but it cannot excuse reckless authority. He talked about power, about boundaries, about responsibility. Then he looked directly at Linda. You were not tasked with enforcing law, he said. You were tasked with enforcing rules. You confuse the two. The sentence was handed down. Prison time, probation, permanent loss of firearm rights. As Linda was led away, she caught a glimpse of Daniel's empty seat. He wasn't there. Maybe that was intentional. Maybe some stories weren't meant to cross paths again. The door closed behind her. And for the first time in her life, Linda had no rules left to hide behind. Only the weight of what she had done, and what could never be undone. Prison had a way of stripping time down to its rawest form. Days weren't measured by clocks anymore. They were measured by noise, doors slamming, footsteps echoing, keys rattling. Linda learned quickly that silence didn't mean peace. It meant waiting. Waiting for lights to turn off. Waiting for meals. Waiting for something, anything, to distract her from her own thoughts. Her sentence wasn't the longest in the facility, but it felt endless. Not because of the number of years, but because of the identity she had lost. Inside, no one cared about HOA rules. No one cared that she once controlled a street. In prison, control belonged to something else entirely. The first weeks were the hardest. Other inmates recognized her from the news. Some mocked her. Some ignored her. A few stared at her with quiet hostility. Clipboard lady, someone whispered once as she passed. Linda kept her head down. She replayed the trial again and again. The body cam footage. Daniel's voice. The question that ended everything. Did you have the option to walk away? Yes. That single word echoed louder than any cell door. Outside those walls, life moved on without her. Maplewood Lane didn't look the same anymore. The white fences remained, but the sense of control was gone. Without the HOA's grip, neighbors slowly reclaimed their space. Lawns grew uneven. Decorations stayed up longer. People parked where they wanted, and no one complained. The house at number 147 was sold quietly months later. No listing photos. No open house. The buyers were never named. Most neighbors assumed it would stay empty. Some stories left scars that couldn't be covered with fresh paint. Daniel Cross was gone. Not relocated. Erased. His testimony eventually happened behind closed doors. No cameras. No public records. Names were sealed. Convictions followed, but quietly. The criminal network fractured. It wasn't the dramatic takedown people imagined. It was quieter, slower. People disappeared from the streets. Businesses shut down overnight. Phone numbers went dead. Justice, when it finally arrived, did so without applause. Linda learned pieces of this through her attorney, who visited less frequently as time passed. There's nothing else you need to do, he told her during one visit. It's over. But it didn't feel over, because the guilt didn't fade. It settled. Linda began avoiding conversations. She stopped watching the news. She stopped reading letters from former neighbors, some angry, some confused, some disturbingly supportive. The hardest letter came from someone she didn't expect. Daniel. It arrived without a return address. No date, just a few lines written carefully, deliberately. I survived, it began. That doesn't mean I was unharmed. Linda read the sentence over and over. I don't hate you, the letter continued, but I will carry that day with me for the rest of my life. Her hands shook. I hope you understand now what power feels like on the other side. That was all. No forgiveness. No condemnation. Just truth. Linda folded the letter and hid it beneath her mattress. That night, she cried for the first time since sentencing. Not for herself. For the man whose life she had nearly ended. For the life she had lived believing rules made her right. As years passed, Linda changed in ways she never expected. She stopped trying to justify herself. She stopped telling her story in a way that made her the victim. She listened. She watched. She learned what it felt like to be on the receiving end of authority without compassion. Prison didn't redeem her, but it humbled her. When her release date finally arrived, there was no one waiting. No family, no neighbors, no second chance waiting neatly outside the gate. Just a bus ticket and a small bag of belongings. Linda stepped into the sunlight, feeling smaller than she ever had. The world didn't recognize her. And that was the point. She moved to a different state, a different city, a place where no one knew her name. She worked quiet jobs, kept to herself, followed rules, but no longer enforced them. Sometimes, when she passed a neat row of houses, she felt a familiar urge rise, the desire to correct, to control, to intervene. And every time she stopped, because she understood now, power isn't proven by how much you can force others to obey. It's proven by knowing when to walk away. Some nights, Linda still dreamed of Maplewood Lane. The knock, the pause, the sound that changed everything. She always woke up before the gunshot, and in that silence, she finally understood the cost of believing authority made her untouchable. Years later, the story of Maplewood Lane had faded from a news cycle, but it never truly disappeared. It lived quietly in court records, sealed documents, and in the memories of people who still lowered their voices when the street was mentioned. To most of the world, it was just another headline from the past. To the people who lived it, it was a reminder that ordinary moments can carry irreversible consequences. Linda rarely spoke about that chapter of her life. In the small apartment she now lived in, there were no photos on the walls, no decorations, no signs of ownership or control, just neutral space, intentional space. She kept it that way. On her kitchen table sat a single notebook, not a planner, not a rule book, a journal. She wrote in it every night, not excuses, not defenses, just reflections. Sometimes she wrote about fear, how quickly it had taken over. Other times she wrote about silence, and how different it felt when it wasn't something she imposed on others, but something she learned to live with herself. She never wrote his name. She didn't need to. Daniel Cross was alive. She knew that much. Once, years after her release, she saw a brief article online. No photo, no details, just a mention of a protected witness whose testimony had finally helped close several long-running investigations. She closed the browser without reading further. Some things weren't hers to revisit. Maplewood Lane had changed too. Without the HOA's grip, the street became something quieter, looser, more human. Neighbors waved again. Kids played longer. Arguments still happened, but they ended without threats or fines. People learned something from what happened there. Not about HOAs, about restraint, about the danger of confusing authority with entitlement. Linda often thought about that moment at the door, not the gunshot, but the seconds before it. The chance she had to step back, to choose curiosity over confrontation. That choice haunted her, because it had been hers. On the 10th anniversary of the incident, Linda did something she had never done before. She stood outside a neighborhood similar to the one she once controlled. Same fences, same sidewalks, same quiet, and she watched. A woman argued with a neighbor over parking. Voices rose. Hands gestured. Tension built. Linda felt her chest tighten. She waited for someone to step in. No one did. And slowly, the argument faded. The cars stayed where they were. Life went on. Linda smiled, not because there was order, but because there was restraint. That night, she wrote one final entry in her journal. Power doesn't reveal who we are. It tests who we choose to be. She closed the notebook and placed it in a drawer. Some lessons didn't need daily reminders anymore. Elsewhere, in a city far from Maplewood Lane, Daniel walked into a cafe he had never been to before. He ordered coffee under a name that wasn't his. He sat by the window and watched people pass by. Ordinary people. Ordinary lives. The kind of normal he had nearly lost. When he finished his drink, he left a tip, nodded to the barista, and walked out without looking back. No one recognized him. That was the victory. Linda and Daniel would never cross paths again, and that was the point. Some stories don't end with forgiveness or redemption. They end with understanding, with the knowledge that a single decision made in arrogance or fear can ripple outward, touching lives in ways we never intended. If there's one thing this story leaves behind, it's this. Rules without empathy become weapons. Authority without humility becomes danger. And power without restraint always demands a price. So before you step forward, before you assume control, before you decide you're right, ask yourself one question. Can I walk away? Because sometimes walking away is the most powerful choice you'll ever make. And if this story made you think, made you pause, or made you see everyday power differently, then don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Subscribe. And remember, not every rule is worth enforcing, but every life is worth protecting. If this story made you feel something, don't scroll away. Stories like this don't go viral because they're loud. They go viral because they're real. If you've ever lived under unfair rules, if you've ever seen power abused, or if this story made you think this could have happened anywhere, then you're not alone. Backhand index pointing right, hit the like button. It tells the algorithm this story mattered. Backhand index pointing right, subscribe to the channel so these real, uncomfortable truths keep reaching people. Backhand index pointing right, comment below. Do you think HOAs protect communities or control them? And one last thing, share this video with someone who believes authority should never go unquestioned. Because the difference between order and tragedy is sometimes just one step and the choice to walk away.